Hi, I'm back again with another chapter. For those of you who are just tuning in, I am currently reading my dad's manuscripts. Basically what I'm doing is I'm going through the whole lot of them and reading them as I go. The reason why I'm doing that is because I want to practice my reading ability and presenting to people, even though it's not directly in front of people, but it will be eventually. And also so that I can hear things that might need to be edited. So it's like an editing process, and it's also so that you can hear a story. The story I'm currently reading right now is called A Voice in the Darkness. I'm currently on chapter 6. So if you're just if you're new to this, you'll probably want to go back to the previous broadcasts of this story in order to get the beginning. Or if you'd like to, you can go back to even further broadcasts to hear other stories that I've read as well. So, but tonight, without further ado, chapter 6. Ondar Clemsmouth had been a minor provincial city before the Confederation had taken the land. There had been considerably less fine marble than in Plutarch, and much of the building was now in rough wood. There were a few pieces of statuary, some of them carefully but noticeably patched, and a few seemingly brand new. Doleg took up quarters in the palace that had belonged to the late Osben Ladavant. It was even possible, divine pervert, that the body he'd seen and the signet in his possession were some deep plan of the rebel Osbans, but he'd act as though Ladavant were dead indeed, and most like all but a few malcontents would believe otherwise. The first afternoon and evening was mostly settling in, little or no business dealt with. Padra and Doleg had a late and simple supper, at which conversation started frivolous, but gradually drifted around to other matters. I wonder what state the harbor is in. I'll have to look into that while I'm here. You're determined to build a fleet then? Yes, as it is, the Imperial fleet can hang around offshore, lob missiles into the cities and cause havoc, without us being able to do anything about it. Ideally, I'd like to take them on and win. But it's realistically going to be some time before we have a fleet that good. I'll settle for forcing them to be a little bit more cautious. It was 5 days after they entered the city, and Doleg was inspecting a section of the wall that his engineers had reported as weak. There was a sudden commotion, and the prince's guard moved in around Doleg, facing out, weapons ready. The commotion turned out to be several people in the dress of upper-class servants, with a boy in their midst, whom they hustled along, his arms twisted up behind him. The servant's spokesman, a sturdy, square-faced fellow, said, "We would like to see the Lord Prince. We have someone here he'd be interested in." Doleg stepped forward. "Who is it?" "This," the spokesman put a hand on the boy's shoulder, "is Tarpral, son of Ladavant." Doleg looked at the boy. "You are Tarpral? Tarpral?" The boy forced himself to stand erect, though his face was pale. "I am Tarpral," he said defiantly. "Will you kill me as you killed my father?" "I might argue that it was not I personally who killed your father, but I suppose I do bear responsibility for his death. But no, I don't make war on boys. Unless you give me a good reason, I won't kill you." "Sir!" Padra protested. "No, Padra. I know you'll say I'd be best to do away with him, and perhaps you're right. But as long as he's my guest, I don't think he'll do me any harm." He turned to the commander of the guard detachment. "Vistagras, detail a pair of men to see him back to the palace. He's my guest, so I'd rather not see any extra bruises on him. But he's also to be kept in seclusion, not allowed outside the bounds of the palace, save by express permission, and always at least 2 guards with him." "Yes, Lord Prince." You say you have news of the prince's army, Captain? Yes, Osmany, Captain Drizzt said. Bird came in from the northwest last night. The prince fought a thundering battle, and Ladavent's army is destroyed. The prince is well. Thank you. Is that the end of it, do you think? He shrugged. Hard to tell, Osmany. A bird can only carry so much. The word was that Ladavent was destroyed, not defeated. At the very least, it's going to be a long time before Ladavent gets another army together. The army won't be marching immediately home, though? Not likely, Osmany. They'll be seeing to the settlement of matters in the northwest, taking loyalty oaths from great and small, all that sort of thing. They'll not likely be back before fall. I see. I suppose the fact that they destroyed Ladavent means liquid fire and crossbows worked as well as was hoped? Again, no specific word, Osmany. There's a word going around, though, that the prince didn't want to use the liquid fire against his own people. Why not? One would think that fighting for rebels, the more terrible the weapon, the better. Your pardon, Osmany, but to know that I'd have to be in the prince's mind, or at least in his confidence. I could see a manner of thinking, though, that would say the same men who'd once watched comrades or brothers or cousins burned by the prince's liquid fire might well be in his own ranks another day, fighting the Nanisses. I see. Thank you, Captain. Your servant, Osmany. There he is, Dolia. He looks like he's selling stones. Knowing Borlus, I bet they're more than mere stones. They're most certainly not, Padya. Well, I'll go inquire. Since the prince was accompanied by a detachment of guards as well as several hangers-on, it was not possible for him to make his way across the market square unnoticed. When Borlus looked over to see what the disturbance was, he nodded as though he'd expected Doleg. When the prince came close enough for him to speak without having to shout, the old magician said, "You've come yourself to investigate, then, Lord Prince?" "Well, I'd been hearing strange stories about you." Borlus laughed sharply. "I'm sure many strange stories could be told about me without stretching the truth." "Which stories do you refer to, Lord Prince?" "I've heard that you're selling stones in the marketplace." "And you suspect they're more than mere stones." "Yes, Lord Prince, right on both counts. And I will not waste your time with forcing you to drag the information out of me bit by bit. The stones are a focus of a growing charm, which will affect any sort of crop. The preferred notion is that the stone be buried no more than a foot deep in a patch of ground, which is presently not productive. Clay, for instance. The charm will last for 5 years, diminishing in effectiveness after that. But if the farmer will save at least half the waste, stems, and leaves and pile it beside the field, then each year dig to the bottom of the pile and rake the rotted matter out and spread it on the field, he'll have a good bit of soil there for the next year's planting." This last part, of course, is something that farmers generally do most times, so it's only urging them to do something they'd likely do anyhow. The waste from the charmed crop might possibly have slightly more benefit than the normal, though I can't be certain. If the farmer and his sons after him continue the process, they may well develop a good field out of a poor one. Borlus paused. This is a simplified explanation and leaves out matters of drainage and so on. His face took on an expression of distaste. Of course, there will be some fools who won't follow the complete instructions, and in about 10 years' time, they'll be left as they began, with a barely productive field. Some, however, will carry on and end by doing well. And you get rich? From Doleg's experience, Borlus never seemed to care very much about wealth and possessions, with the exception of his library of writings, ancient and modern. Rich? Hardly. But consider human nature, Lord Prince. If I give the stones away, the farmers will feel that they can hardly be worthwhile, since they cost nothing. And few will give them a fair trial. If they have to pay for the stones, though, they will take the matter more seriously. The point of the matter, Lord Prince, is that I may amass, is not that I amass any great amounts of coin, but that some farmers, at least, improve their fields. I see. And because of this, my tax revenues improve? Borlace frowned. Lord Prince, my aim is not quite so straightforward. In fact, it may not amount to much of anything at all. I am hoping, though, that since I am connected to your court, the improvement of some crops might well end in an improvement of attitudes toward you. Not quite so impressive as a spell on the people, but likely to be more effective. And Dolag nodded and smiled. Thank you. We will leave you to your mercantile endeavors. Large portions of the army went to other parts of the Northwest, in part to ease the burden on any one place for supplying them, and in part because some groups of ex-soldiers from the forces of the late Osban Ladavant had turned to banditry and had to be dealt with. Doleg and the greatest part of the army stayed at Ondarg, seeing to matters there and providing a central location for nobility, major and minor, to come give their oaths of loyalty. One day the servants brought a man to him. Lord Prince, since it has become known that you are interested in the harbor and in shipbuilding, we thought you might want to speak to this man. He is a shipwright, a man by the name of Bangfa. They brought forth a stocky little square-built square man. This is a shipbuilder, Bangfa, Lord Prince. Dolag looked the man over. Where did you learn your trade, Bangfa? On the ships of the great Medalligus herself, Lord Prince. I won't tell you I was chief shipwright, or any such nonsense, but I do know all the tricks of the trade, and can build you ships to match the Imperials, if you give me the material. And yet you're here, in Ondarg Clemsmouth, not plying your trade in the great Medalligus? Bangfa's mouth went into a straight line. One of those things, Lord Prince. We were buying timber from Valdessa Ta's estate, overpriced, but he was paying a bit to the chief shipwright in order to hold the contract. Then the imperial auditors went to their work again and declared this to be a malfeasance. I was the nearest one to the situation who didn't have the lord of his front name in front of his name, so they put it to me. And you left? Wasn't much choice, Lord Prince. I hadn't the money to buy my way out, and the alternative was the lead mines. One of my friends let me know in advance which way the wind was blowing, so I took passage on a ship up here. I've been building rowboats and fishing boats up here, and hoping the Emperor doesn't decide that it's important that I be punished. So part of any agreement I make with you is that you protect me from Imperial vengeance. Can you do so? Shipwright, I'd say your danger from the Nanisas is greater than your danger from the Empire. Little fellows on horses? How much danger could they be? Shipwright, there was a time when what we called Length Wheel was the imperial province of the Golars. Then, during one of many seasons that the Empire was busy fighting the Gishnappids, a federation of tribes, mostly men on horses, came down from the high plains. By the time of the warrior emperor, it was no longer possible to restore the Golars province, despite his attempts at extinguishing the Lantha. A little bad luck on the eastern frontier, and in 5 years the Nanisas might well be settling their flocks to graze among the ruins of Ondarg. Though Dolag saw that Bangfa was impressed by the prince's strong feelings on the matter, he suspected the shipwright was not entirely convinced. He didn't bother attempting to persuade the man, however. History aside, one thing I need is a strong fleet. If you'll pardon me, Lord Prince, the building of hulls and setting masts is one thing. You need captains and crews, and good ones too. before you can go up against the Imperial fleet. Yes, shipwright, I know that very well. I'll have to hope that I can avoid facing the fleet until my crews and masters are trained and ready. 2 days afterward, Doleg was walking the walls. A tour of inspection that was more of an excuse for him to get out of the stifling palace. His guards were watchful. The last known plot against the prince's life had been broken up just last week. But it was just that, the last known plot. How many others are out there that were not known? A further question pressed on Doleg's mind was, just how did a man like Ladavant inspire such loyalty that people still sought out revenge for his death? Not that vengeance for Ladavant was necessarily the whole of it, not by a long step. Killing Doleg would leave Tarpral, young as he was, the next thing to an heir available, and a boy at that. One who would need a regent for some years. The man who could put himself in that position would, to all intents and purposes, rule the principality. The repairs of the walls are satisfactory, Lord Prince. He looked at Boralus, who had accompanied them, in an unobtrusive manner he was so adept at. Oh, yes, the repairs. Good enough, I suppose. Boralus smiled slightly. You were clumping along at such a clip, I wondered if you'd noticed. Doleg managed to find a smile of his own. The prince wants to get out of this God's forsaken office and breathe some air. Doesn't sound as good as the prince wants to inspect the walls. They continued, slowing their pace a little. How have you gotten on with Vangva? A very careful man, Lord Prince. He took my ship plans with a show of enthusiasm, but I don't believe he thinks I know a thing about ships. The question will be, does he toss the plans aside without looking at them, or tosses them aside after looking at them, or perhaps follows them to the letter, or perhaps follows them generally while making changes here and there based on his own experience? I'd suggested that the worst would be if he followed those plans to the letter. It'd mean he was trying to do just what I want, without regard for what works best. I've already gotten too many who'll say, yes, Lord Prince, if I declare that the sky is green. Boralus was gazing up into the sky to the northeast. The prince could see a small speck up there, a bird of some sort. Lord Prince, would you pause and stand just there in that corner? Doleg went alert. What is it, Boralus? Lord Prince, I'll give you all the explanations you wish later. In a few moments, I'm going to be extremely busy. Please stand here in the corner. Boralus kept his eye on the bird as it approached, moving more rapidly than a bird might. Doleg stepped into the corner and turned, facing out. It was a position that would protect his back and, to some degree, his sides, though it would restrict his movements. His guards restricted him further, moving in to stand between him and whatever danger was approaching. Yes, that was a bird in the sky, something resembling a mix of seagull and eagle, and it was approaching very rapidly, making a slight change of course to aim itself directly at Doleg. Boralus pronounced a word, Koltsha, which seemed to boom out over the city. Everything seemed to slow. Boralus pulled off his cloak in a smooth motion and tossed it between Doleg and the oncoming bird thing. The vicious-looking metallic beak hit the cloak, piercing it, but Boralus grasped the bundle, bird, cloak and all, and swung it to smash into the wall. Sparks flew, stone cracked. The bird thing fell to the walkway. Boralus put a foot on it, calling out, Efoshiz Staskik! There was a flash under his foot, and the magician stumbled away to catch himself against the wall. The bird thing, a mass of feathers and wicked-looking eyes, lay still. Beak and claws began to fade away rapidly. Boralus, are you all right? I've been a good deal better, Lord Prince, but barring any great catastrophe, I will survive. What was that thing? A Pranchka, Lord Prince. Yes, I know, not the usual cat form, but still, dangerous enough for all that. Is there still magic in it? No, not anymore. It's got as much magic left as a chunk of stone. I've sent its spirit on its way. As easy as that? Easy, Lord Prince? If anything were to happen in the next day and a half requiring magic, I'd be as much use as a worn dish rag. I've used myself up. Doleg looked at his surroundings. You arranged the situation? After a fashion. You are the prince, and there are always currents of hostility around you. Today, I won't claim anything so strong as premonition. Just a strong feeling that something would happen today. Something more than a man with a dagger trying to get past your guard. When I saw the thing in the sky, I knew what it was, and it was time for me to make immediate preparations, which I did, successfully, as you see. Who sent it? Lord Prince. I was too busy keeping it from putting its spirit beak through your heart to be able to track its source. As I said, for the next day and a half or so, I won't be able to do much. After that time, what traces there are will have largely dissipated. I'd suggest finding someone in the city to do it for you. The wizard's name was Cridmon, a wiry-looking fellow, gray-haired, gray-beard, and leaning heavily on a stick. There hadn't been much time to shop for wizards, given the urgency of beginning as soon as possible, but Cridmon came with good recommendations and had gone to work with commendable alacrity. Now the next day he was reporting in. Well, wizard, what news have you for us? Cridmon bobbed his head in a sketchy bow. I have, Lord Prince. The Pranchka was sent by one in the pay of your enemy, Osvan Ladavant. I see. And if I remind you that Osvan Ladavant's head was set up over the city gates shortly after I arrived here, what then? Cridmon faltered just slightly. So slightly, Doleg might have missed it if he had not been watching for it. Lord Prince, it would seem that Osvan Ladavant must have paid for it before his death, and the one who was paid felt bound to produce it, despite the death of its paymaster. I see. Thank you, Cridmon. You may go. Collect your payment from my servants. The prince watched as the wizard hobbled out, then turned to Padra. Well, that was money wasted. He was sure he knew what I wished to hear, so he told me. And there's still some God's lost fool out there buying Pranchka to send against me. You're sure it wasn't as he said it was? Possible, but doubtful, Padra. You saw his face when I challenged him. Perhaps he did some work on the matter, but he came in here attempting to sell me Ladavant as a culprit. There are some who don't believe Ladavant is dead. Cridmon just happens to be one of them. Or perhaps Ladavant isn't dead? Possible, but doubtful. Arranging a body of the appropriate size and a band of farmers to haul it and explain the circumstances of their possession of it sounds like a rather complicated plot. Nor have any rumors we've heard about Ladavant being alive and over Clem ever been shown to have any credibility. Borlis proved to be little more help. I was scarcely in fit state to tell left from right, let alone something so tricky as tracking a Pranchka. And I was left with scant time to interview magicians, or rather have it done. I wonder if my people picked Cridmon because they knew he'd tell me what I wanted to hear. Borlis nodded. Every ruler in every land or city needs to ask forever, are my people agreeing with me because I'm right, or because I have power over them? I suppose I can count on you for the truth? I wish I could count on myself for the truth. I can assure you, though, that I would not hesitate to disagree with you if I think you're wrong. And Padra will call me sir if he thinks I'm wrong. Well, that's a help. So I suppose there's little chance of finding who sent the Pranchka? I'll even settle for the magician who made it. No, I think the only way we might find that is by talking to someone who actually knows, or has been told, or has heard somehow. The usual business of tracking rumors. And sort out who's saying what they think I want to know, who's telling imaginative stories, who's trying to undercut someone else for whatever reason. Doleg sighed. So let it be then. Well, I think we've done as much damage here as we can. I hope to leave for Plutarch in 3 days' time, taking the bulk of the army with me. No one will be surprised if I leave Osmond Hallraft in charge here? You seem to have been leaning that way for a long time. It doesn't surprise me, but do you think he's the right choice? He'll do as well as any, Padya, better than many. Because he insisted on coming along? That's part of it, Padya, but only a part. I think he'll do a good job. You don't think you're giving him a little too much power? Rule over Ladovant's territory, oversight over 2 others, as well as his own territory? Yes, I am, and I'm going to be looking for people to lighten his load as soon as may be. We have to start making plans to deal with the Nanisses next year, though, and we have to do something about the Imperial barracks. He's kept our Perel alive? I wouldn't have expected that. No, Osmond, nor would I. The captain was frowning. I hope it's a mercy that doesn't come back to bite him. For certain. Any claim the boy has on the principality is shaky at best. But while he's alive, he'll be a focus for all complainers and malcontents to gather around. It hurts you recognize that for truth. A ruler should show mercy, but mercy can come at a high price. In this case, another rebellion somewhere down the road. It brought up the question, would a man who could murder his brother show mercy to a 12-year-old boy who is a potential danger to him? Anything else, Captain? Yes, Osmond. I'd suggest you be careful when you go out and where you go. I've heard stories that the Imperials are getting food into the barracks despite the blockade, and I've heard that these stories from enough sources that I feel there's something to them. The way I see it, if they can slip food in, they can slip men out. If they could take the prince's intended as a hostage, they might have something to bargain with. You really think that's a possibility? It's my job to think of possible dangers and to have a plan for them, Osmond. You can be sure that if the idea has occurred to me, it has occurred to others. With the beginning of the fall rains, the first part of the army, including the prince and his chief of people, arrived at Plutarch. Hermione decided to show herself at the gate for the prince's arrival. A story had come to her that some people were calling her a crabby little toad who thought she was too good for that prince. Since she was eventually going to be his consort, it seemed best to her not to alienate the whole city. Life could be bad enough without having all the people hate her as well. The watchman on the walls had passed the word of the prince's arrival, allowing a small crowd to build up. Soldiers, mainly a detachment of the prince's guard, kept the street clear, while Hermione's guard found a place for her in the crowd. That required a little pushing, which gained her some evil glances. They dislike me already, and my pushing among them to greet the prince doesn't make them like me the more. If I were not here at all, then they'd put that fact as a mark against me too. I lose whatever I do. Her attention was attracted by a deputation across the street, led by a priest of the divine pair, come to welcome the prince home. By some chance, or possibly by some specific malice, a deputation representing the third god was next to them, and the evil looks Hermione had received were mild reproofs compared to the stares that passed back and forth between the two groups. There was some jostling back and forth between the two parties. A riot to greet the prince's return would be unseemly, not to mention ill-omened. But I'm over here across the street with only a small guard. Is there something I should do? Even as she contemplated action, the first of the prince's guard rode through the gate, followed by the prince himself, with his party. When the prince came into sight, the crowd began to cheer. Old Borlus was with the prince, the old imperial scholar of whom she'd heard strange things. There were a plethora of tales as to why the old man had been exiled from the empire, and no one knew the origin of his name. He'd been a tutor to the princely heirs for a long time, and didn't seem to act old enough for all that age, which is probably one of the reasons why people distrusted him. The prince smiled at the crowd and waved a hand. The cheers redoubled. Then Doleg saw her, and gave her a special wave. No, she doubted that this was some great romance for the epics, but both of them had to make the best of it. She'd heard the story about his impression of her. Good enough looking, but with a tongue on her. If wishes were of any use, she'd wished they'd been under better circumstances, and not when she was dealing with the aftermath of a bad accident in her train. Shouting across the way had changed from cheers to anger. The prince glanced back, then drew his sword and wheeled his horse, plunging forward, his guard with him. It was, of course, the two rival religious groups, who'd gone from exchanging nasty looks to physical hostilities. She saw weapons being wielded by both the prince and his guard, and wondered that he himself took such a direct hand in something so ordinary, soldiers ought to be doing? And was it necessary to kill people to break up a riot? The prince appeared to be using the flat of his blade, but many of the guard were not so cautious. She turned to the head of her guard detachment. I think it would be best if we get ourselves out of here. Yes, Osbany. The greatest problem was that the trouble between the two religious deputations was the only spark. Practically everyone in the crowd had a commitment to one side or another, and it wouldn't take much to have them all pummeling each other in the name of the divine pair or the third god. Her guard pulled in around her, and they pushed their way out, carefully. It had to be carefully. Anything risked more people pushing or even striking back, which would cause just the sort of trouble that they were trying to avoid. She was happy when they got out of the press, and she could breathe more easily. Sir, it's not up to the Prince of Lengthwheel to manage crowd control. Yes, I know, Padya. If I could get a decent, reliable story as to which deputation had been there first, I'd toss the other into jail to rot. Their leaders should have known there was a possibility, even a likelihood of trouble. It doesn't change the fact that you put yourself in needless danger. I told you, Padya. When the thing started, I and my guard were the closest ones to reinforce the soldiers already there. You can imagine the omens coming out of a religious riot on my return, particularly one that wasn't quelled immediately. But can you imagine the possibility of someone organizing things just so that we can get close enough to use a dagger or anything else on the prince? You might recall, we never did find out for certain who was behind the Franchka in Ondarg. There's still a person or two out there. He waved an arm to encompass the whole entire city, perhaps even the principality, who don't support you wholeheartedly, sir. All right, I made a snap decision. Perhaps not the wisest one. I'll try to do better. The prince spent a day and a half catching up on matters. There were several items which had been relayed to him in Ondarg by the Silver Lump, but regarding some of these, there had been little useful he could do to warn the people to keep a sharp eye on the matter. That, of course, was not actually useful, a fact he well knew, but short of dividing himself into pieces and sending one to each place where he was necessary, it was all he could do. The officer in charge of the forces barricading the Imperial barracks was standing before Doleg's wood table, on which there were a welter of papers. So, this business of the Imperials smuggling food in, you're fairly certain of it? Quite certain, Lord Prince. We've had a few specific reports, and questioned some who admitted the fact. There are always some who are willing to sell the rope to be used to hang them. Doleg looked over at Padra. Doesn't it strike you, Padya, that the Empire seems to think about us with two minds? On the one hand, we're safe enough that they can pull out the greater part of the garrison here, but on the other hand, they've made sure that the barracks are fortified and ready to stand siege, up to and including large quantities of food at hand. Padya shrugged. I don't think either we or the Empire have looked at each other straight since the days of the warrior emperor. Lord Prince? The commander said tentatively. Yes. I suspect, Lord Prince, that the bits of food they've been buying are mainly a means of keeping contacts open. The main thing is passing through the blockade is information. Any bit of information they get is a problem for us, great or small. Yes, we'll have to do something about that. If we were to start a rumor about our building catapults or other engines so as to wipe them out, would that story get to them? Most likely, Lord Prince. It's only a matter of how quickly it'll get to them. Padra looked up. You have a plan in mind? More likely, the beginnings of a plan. Get some of our men practicing the kind of assault we'll be making if we come at them pretty well head on. And of course, you'll do something else? Got a trick in mind, do you? On the third day after they had arrived from the northwest, Doleg was seated at his desk going over reports. A boy was ushered in, who announced, "Message from the Silver Lump, Lord Prince." "Ah, let's see it. Thank you." He scanned it, then looked up at Padra, giving Borlis a glance as well. "It seems we may not have to be concerned about the Nisses this year. The Harch says that they're pulling themselves out of the plague. They're still pulling themselves out of the plague. There was a rumor, trustworthy as any rumors that come across the frontier, that one of Gulani's chieftains has broken away." Padua looked up from where he'd been removing a rust spot from his dagger with a whetstone. "Nice if true." "Exactly. But we all know about the life and times of rumors. Not to put much stock in something like that." So that's the end of this chapter for tonight. It's a little... It needs some work here and there. Overall, it's good. I think there's just some parts of it that need to have some more smoothing out. This is no Wolf Talisman, but there's definitely some parts I'm seeing that they could use to be a little bit larger. Just talking about stuff, not even that pad. Again, not about padding, just about telling some more of the story. So, and that is my plan, is to tell more of the story. So I will do that again, and I will talk to you again really soon. Take care.